Yeah.
That was bad for the record. Sure.
Years gone by.
That field, if we care, said what kids do to do.
That is true. That is true.
I got it.
Oh, those first couple of classes. We've had some really smart kids. Went on to write books. Presidents of Senate, whatever it is, or districts.
Yeah, Gene Nissan, Gene,
Yeah.
he was wonderful. This is how it's out.
Obviously, somewhat of a charismatic.
Yeah.
Besides being extremely smart guy. I guess he's still living.
I don't think so. I don't know.
He lived in the area, so we heard about him once in a while, and saw him occasionally. They may have looked over you, but
Yeah.
And Carol,
John.
John, this is Mike.
Pastor Mike. That's fine.
and I was trying to remember your last name. What is it?
Gunther.
What?
Gunther.
Say it again.
Gunther.
Gunther.
Yeah. Kind of. Yep.
See if I can get
Just
that.
abbreviated to the way it sounds.
We better both try. And we will probably both not succeed either. Oh, well. If I can at least remember John, that was a big step in the right direction. Where are we?
We didn't start it.
We finished Ezra. No, we're just gonna keep on going like we
Well,
we'll see.
Lester even knows the earliest one,
And that
the
works.
earliest story.
That's right.
It's after Ezra and Nehemiah. Esther's after.
Yeah, because that's what we just did on our Thursday meeting. What am I looking for? Esther is right there.
Yeah, it's right after Nehemiah.
Is it after Nehemiah?
Yeah. Even though it's the earliest one, it's the last one of mine, but it's of
They aren't
three.
done in order, are they?
No, that is.
Yeah, it says Nehemiah. And then Esther. It's after Nehemiah.
Right. Good. I don't know what it is.
Oh, yeah, we have the videos. Leviticus.
All right, so I have to confess that I have forgotten at what time we are supposed to start. I generally run long, and so we've been kind of starting right at around 10 o'clock. 9:45 is the official start time. All right. Sorry. Usually your preacher is more long-winded, and we're not getting nicely out of church until that time. All right. We did kind of make our way through the end of Ezra. You guys finished it while I was gone, and then last week we kind of recapped a little bit, and we touched on the difficult subject of Ezra recommending that all the marriages to the non-Jewish people be dissolved. And so there is a fact that there were probably a lot of divorces that took place, if you will. And it was communicated to me that didn't really sit very well, because it kind of seems contrary to Scripture, where Scripture tells us that God hates divorce. But we talked through that last week, right? We talked through the fact that anytime interracial marriage is talked about in Scripture, it is always a spiritual condition, never a physical condition. That scripturally, there are no such things as different human races. That was a concept introduced, if not introduced, at least made famous by Charles Darwin in his book, The Descent of Man, as he applied the theory of evolution to human beings. And he lists the 7 different races, if you will, and flat out says that some of those are evolutionarily inferior. And so, again, in Scripture, there's never a thing as a biological interracial marriage. Scripture is very clear. There is only one race, and it is the human race. All right? God built into our DNA all of the diversity that exists, okay? And so the one prohibition that God gives is that we are not to marry outside of the faith. He gave that in the Old Testament to the Jews, and I could still make a fairly sound theological argument that applies even today, that we are not to marry someone who's not a Christian. Now, again, if a person is intending to convert, I leave us pastors the leeway to make that decision. But if conversion is not really an intent, and instead if compromise is an intent, then scripturally, I believe there is a problem. And so what we talked about last week, is that once Ezra made this declaration that these marriages had to end, and we looked at why Ezra would make such a strong statement, and that's the fact that from the very beginning, from the very occupation of the promised land, the people had been disobeying this command. They have been. You and I will talk about Jesus coming again, right? And Jesus comes again as judge, and that God has the authority to judge, right? We as a church are okay saying God can judge. But remember that God is also a God of means, that God will often work through means to carry out his will. And sometimes that includes judgment. So, for example, when God gives the command to his people to go into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Hivites and all these ites who are already in the promised land, God's command was what? Wipe them out, genocide, right? And Israel's like, ooh, God, that's kind of harsh, right? They didn't have a problem wiping out the enemy combatants, but the women, the children, they didn't. They disobeyed God. And so oftentimes you and I, even today, will hear that command and say, wow, God, that's a little harsh, right? But we forget that God has the authority to judge, and God sometimes uses people to judge. There's a case in the Old Testament, I mentioned this last week, there was one of the tribal leaders, his son or he had married a non-Jew. And there was a priest named Phineas who, right on the marriage bed, took a spear and impaled both, the Jew and the non-Jew, killing them both. And his zeal was lauded. And you're like, this guy just committed double murder. And yet, God applauded that zeal. Phineas was God's instrument to bring judgment, upon the sinner. And so you and I are okay with the case of, in the New Testament, of Ananias and Sapphira, right? Where God himself is the one who carries out the judgment. You and I are okay with Sodom and Gomorrah when it's God himself who does what? Rains down the fire, where God is the active one doing the destroying. You and I get a little squeamish when God uses his people to carry out his judgment. But the fact that Israel had disobeyed that command and had begun that intermarriage with non-Jews, all right, that spiritual interracial marriage, that had caused nothing but heartache and idolatry and stumbling for the Israel as a nation. Okay, and so you can see, because in the prayer of Ezra is very clear, saying that from the very beginning, even our fathers, we have been steeped in sin. We've been repeating this sin against God over and over and over and over. And it led to our idolatry, which led to God allowing us to be conquered, which led to us being slaves now in the promised land. The promised land belonged to the king of Persia, and yet here they are as slaves back in their own land, back in their own home. And it's all because of this idolatry. And so you get this, you can understand Ezra taking a strong stand, saying, we are not going to keep repeating this sin. This ends now. But as always, there is a high price to that. And so as we left it last week, the elders, the rulers, said, hey, this is a big thing. Give us time so that we can go village to village, if you will, which is what they wound up doing. And I don't know how many months it took them. We didn't do the calculation. But they kind of, and we saw that there was some logic and there was some order to this. So these large-scale divorces just didn't happen all at once. This wasn't an overnight thing. And my speculation, and I admitted it was my speculation, is that because when you look at the temple itself, the temple had a court that converts to Judaism could go into. It was one of the outer courts. It may have been the farthest one away. You had the Gentiles could go sort of close. The converts to Judaism could go a little closer. The Jews, male and female, could go a little closer. And then the males could go a little bit closer, and then you just had the priests and Levites after that. So there was an actual court of the temple for the converts to Judaism. And so I would imagine that folks were given the opportunity to say, hey, we are not gonna, we're not gonna go halvesies, not half Baal and half Jew and half Yahweh. We'll commit to following him alone. And I would imagine that those marriages were allowed to stay. But if there was any wavering on that, I also imagine that those marriages were ended. And I know we don't like it. I get it. But I also understand, Ezra's insistence that this sin that had so plagued the nation of Israel was not going to be repeated. And then the book of Ezra, just like the book of Nehemiah, just has a very abrupt ending. That's it. All right. Yes, John.
Things that I find puzzling about this marriage issue here is way back in Genesis, Isaac sent Jacob to Uncle Laban, who was an idolater. And Rachel brings back the family idols when they leave Laban. So why would God send Jacob to Laban?
Jacob ran away to Laban. Abraham sent his servant to Sarah's family.
They were,
In Genesis 31.
but they were heading back to Israel. After
Eliezer went
Right.
to
Right.
Laban. No, Laban was actually.
Laban was the brother of
Rachel,
of-
Rebecca. That's who Isaac.
Right.
And then Jacob, after he pulled his stunt,
Went to his uncle
Laban.
Rebecca. Right.
Yeah.
And
Jacob is
because
related to
right.
his mother about 4 different ways.
Yeah. Because Isaac, they had their favorites, right? Just as Abraham and Sarah, they played favorites. They favored Isaac over Ishmael. And that family dysfunction repeats the next generation because then Isaac favored Esau and Rebekah favored Jacob. And so when Jacob then runs away, he of course goes,
But it specifically
back
said
to
his
Rebekah's.
mother sent it back.
He goes back to Uncle Laban.
In 28, Isaac called Jacob and said, "Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother." And Laban was the idolater.
Okay.
So that's just kind of.
Well, part of that may have been too. Esau married some of the locals there, outside of.
Yes.
And that provided no end of trouble for Isaac and Rebekah. It says.
Well, they're descendants. Yes.
Yes, but no, even the problem, Esau became a little uncontrollable because his wives were yanking him in different directions that Rebecca and Isaac didn't like. And so part of that problem was Isaac repeating the same thing that his father had done for him, went back to the
Right.
extended family that was back up in
Right.
Pagan Aram.
But that was to hide Jacob from Esau.
Correct.
That was part of it, yeah.
A great TV series.
Hey, that's the awesome thing about all these people is that even the patriarchs are as messed up as the rest of us are. Okay. My thought would be that since we've been doing Ezra and Nehemiah and this chunk of time in history, that we might as well just go for the trifecta and chuck in Esther as well, because it's very much the same portion. But if some of you want to go a different direction, if you're tired of of this chunk of history, I get it. We've been doing this almost for a year now, off and on. Although Esther's not a very long book.
Goes pretty quick.
I think we've recently gone through it too.
Oh, have we recently gone through Esther?
My memory correctly?
Well, I don't know about you, but Our Lady's Bible study has, as with it now. Yeah, but that's okay. You know, I always learn something new every time.
So how recent is recent?
Well, this last 2 weeks, and when did we end?
Oh my. All right.
But that's just, what, 2 of us, 3 of us? Yeah.
We did some of Esther.
The men need to hear it.
We did Esther on Tuesday night. Maybe
We can learn more.
How long ago on Tuesday night?
Year and a half.
A year and a half. All right, so we have done Esther.
Well, I don't know that we are done with this, so we can read it again. There's always something new to learn.
Another slant on it here.
Because you're always with different people.
Well, it's an interesting book.
We can get it done before Christmas.
But it postpones the break a couple of Sundays.
Say that again, Ted?
Ending the 3 books that are hanging together only postpones the ultimate, now what should we do?
Oh, that is true.
We could get this done before Christmas.
Yes,
Oh, wow.
it'll be a good one.
You guys
Give you a real.
haven't had enough classes with me yet. All right.
We'll have to speed you up.
My confirmation students learn really early that I am so easy to get off on a tangent, and they'll just start doing it on purpose just to, wind me up and watch me go. All right. Well, all right, then I will just beg your indulgence, and we'll try and go through Esther here. So if you've got the Lutheran Study Bible, there's a couple notes on Esther that is, I think, worth going over. one of the things that I like just in the formatting of the Lutheran Study Bible is that as they introduce each book, they'll share some of Luther's words on it. And so I'm getting the sense that you all have read these recently, but I'm going to read them again. So in the Lutheran Study Bible, these are some of Luther's thought on the book of Esther. He says, the greater part of a nation always belongs to the devil and is idolatrous. Thus there is no doubt that Mordecai and Esther gained many people, but they were not able to correct the kingdoms in their entirety. Simple garb and adornment is more fitting for a woman than a wagon load of pearls. I do not want to interpret this too scrupulously, that rich clothing is forbidden to women. Here we must make exceptions for weddings. A woman adorns herself in honor of her groom, but goes about in common fashion otherwise. Scripture commends the adornment for a spouse. After all, a queen must bedeck herself, as did Esther. If she clothes herself with care and good taste, she is not decorating herself, but acting in accord with the custom and allegiance to the people with whom she lives. If it were the custom, then it would be a matter of choice for her to adorn herself or not. In allegiance to her groom, in honor of her wedding and her husband, she should dress otherwise than one dresses in church, where one ought to wear proper clothing. The church, which is thoroughly sanctified in the cross of Christ, has holiness because she abstains from all that is of the world and the flesh, and she has majesty in all riches, goods, houses, costs, etc. But this majesty of the church, which is spiritual, is altogether opposite to what men have known. For it does not do great things according to the world. Indeed, in this way, the lowest contempt and squalor are in her. But she builds magnificent spiritual houses, crammed full with costly banquets, very famous for throngs of people and nobles, so that the feast of Xerxes is as nothing here, but in the eyes of the spiritual and of the angels. The challenge for readers, it's pointed out, is that the name of God is never directly mentioned in the book of Esther. So this is going to be one of those areas. Recently I preached on the larvae day, the mask of God, how God is hidden in things and in people, and often hidden in his opposite. And so while there is no direct reference to God here, you're getting a lot of indirect, especially there's allusions to the work of God's hand. You've got prayer, you've got devotion that's going to go on, just no direct references to God. And because there are no direct references to God, there's been some scholars throughout history who said that this book does not belong in the canon of Scripture, but since it's here, obviously those did not win the debate. All right. Chapter 1. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, who reigned from Indria to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all of his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness, for many 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen, and purple 2 silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. All right. So this king, he reigned from 486 BC to 465 BC. He is the son of Darius I, the grandson of Cyrus the Great. It was Cyrus who had issued the decree that allowed the Judeans in captivity to return to their homeland. Ahasuerus is the Hebrew rendering of the Persian title Mighty Man, a title the king used on monumental inscriptions. He is better known by his Greek name Xerxes. And because Xerxes is much easier to pronounce than Ahasuerus, I'm going to call him Xerxes from now on, because I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing Ahasuerus correctly. I'm just guessing. You need a smart person with their doctoral degree maybe to tell us how this is pronounced, but I'm going to go with Xerxes. So this is a pretty grand feast. You've got a feast then for all the officials, and I want to say, when it says servants, I'm going to mean probably governmental employees, if you will, those folks, those functionaries who help the government to, function. All the clerks and the scribes and whatnot, as well as then the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and governors of the provinces. So you had the who's who have their big feast, 180 days. So basically for 6 months, this is a pretty extravagant gesture by King Xerxes. And maybe he was doing it to show his greatness. Maybe he was doing it to consolidate power.
This was just before his second Persian invasion of Greece.
Okay.
So most of the speculation, it's probably pretty well founded, is that this was a big combat to get all of his subordinate leaders out there to come up with the troops and all that.
Right. And if he had to do any arm twisting to fund this from the nobles and whatnot. Yeah.
That's probably the main reason for this.
All right.
Because he embarked on that over the next couple of years, and this story spans both sides of it.
And at the conclusion of this 6-month, this half-year feast, he now extends the generosity to the commoners. And again, this would probably be just for the men, since there's also a verse that Queen Vashti had done this for the ladies as well.
It doesn't really say that that 180 days was all spent partying that way. It does say, you know, that they were then.
I would imagine, yeah, that it, yeah.
That.
He was hosting a whole bunch of people.
But
Yeah, I-
180 days he was showing off. is what
Yeah.
he was doing.
Yeah,
He
yep.
was displaying his vast.
Yeah, I would imagine that these were,
They maybe weren't.
yeah, they were probably events that were spread across 180 days, each for a different chunk, if you will. And then even when you extend it to the commoners, if you go back to John's point, you know, when you need some commoners to fill the ranks of the troops, what a great way, what a great recruiting strategy, if you will.
There were signs all over the city that said Uncle Xerxes needs you.
Yes, yeah, you know, you butter them up with the king's wine, and then, you know, the next thing you know, you're in the king's legion, yeah, you know. Whether there were any press gangs going on at this time or not.
But as usual, when they're in high spirits, or maybe they have been drunken a little bit too much, oh, let's try something different. I'll get
Yes.
my wife because she's a beauty.
Yes. Vashti, my note on verse 9 is that her name Vashti is from the Persian word Vahista, which means best. So, Queen the best. On the seventh day, verse 10, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Xerxes, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him.
I went to Queen. I wouldn't want to be marched around in front of a bunch of drunk guys. They probably were a little bit tipsy.
Yep, I would imagine that there was a great amount of inebriation taking place. The note on verse 12. Although no reason is stated, Queen Vashti's impertinence may have stemmed from her revulsion at being displayed publicly before the king's drunken and lascivious lackeys, merely as an ornamental object. But she does what a queen is not supposed to do. When you are the king of the Persian Empire, the word no is not one that you hear on a regular basis. Verse 13. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Xerxes delivered by the eunuchs.
Was that the Supreme Court of the day?
Well, again, I have to revert. I have to revert to the notes, and the notes here say probably royal astronomers who knew the inner workings of the kingdom, the previous legal precedents, the pulse of the nation, and the most propitious astrological signs to guide the king's decisions. So this is interesting. So this could be, would we call these guys maybe the proto-magi, if you will, the very first in the long line of the astronomers? Could very well be, right? Because if you would do a different context and say, you know, if you would apply this description to the magi who came from the east, which is again where these folks would have come from, this would be east of Jerusalem. So it could be. These could be the forerunners, to the Magi, or at least the Magi may have shared a similar education to these fellows. But they were obviously the counselors, the folks that if the king seeks their opinion first, that just means that they have a great deal of influence and authority. And we're going to see throughout the book of Esther, how the king gets influenced. And we saw this again with Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king, and Nehemiah's service to the king also influenced part of this decision, although God, of course, gets the ultimate credit, for influencing Cyrus to give the go-ahead to return. All right. Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, "Not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, 'King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come.' This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty."
There's the catch right there.
Yes.
What did he say?
He said, there's the catch right there.
Place would go over to hell in a handbasket if we allow this to happen.
You just can't have that happening.
Is that a lesson we should take?
So you can tell that the king's advisors were all guys.
They're alpha males.
Alpha males, could be.
And if the king doesn't agree with them, then they can start spreading sedition amongst the kingdom. They're so powerful.
So again, Memucan is putting forth the worst case scenario, right? There's no guarantee that this is going to happen, and you have no idea whether Memucan was using his position and he had some kind of an axe to grind against Vashti, and now he is taking this act of hers and, he's extrapolating to the absolute, worst case scenario. Now, again, with these kinds of situations, it's kind of like watching a football game with my dad. I was watching the Michigan game with my father yesterday, and he's a very pessimistic football game watcher, right? And so, you get, a quarter and a half in, and it's like, oh, no, this game is already. Now, yesterday, he was right, but it's not always that way, okay? And in fact, rarely when you try and carry things out to the worst case scenario, do things ever turn out that way. As a church, you always have to figure in and know that God is at work, right? That somehow God will make things happen even when you don't see a way that things can happen. I love to tell the story of attending board of directors meetings at my first congregation. And so when you operate a parochial school, you're always on the financial edge of disaster. Always. You really wind up living basically Sunday to Sunday. And so my very first meeting, I was ordained, and then I was installed, and 2 weeks later, I'm at my very first board of directors meeting as their new associate pastor, and the agenda was this: we're broke, we have this much money, we have these many bills. And any of you who have ever attended church directors, board of directors, or church council meetings, that's how most of them wind up going. And so when I attended my last board of directors meeting at that church, this was 21 years later, the agenda was, we're broke, we've got this much money, and we've got these many bills. And you look back and you would say from that very first meeting, that this trajectory just can't continue. It made absolutely no sense from a business standpoint. I remember times we elected a new treasurer, and the guy quit the very first meeting because he saw the budget and he saw that we had this much money and these many bills, and he looked at us from a business standpoint, and he had a temper issue. He dropped a few F-bombs and threw his stuff on the table and walked out the door. And you couldn't say that he was wrong from a business standpoint. This is a horrible model, Hey, it cost you $9,000 to educate a child, and you're charging $3,000. That is a bad business model. And it was, and it is, and it makes no sense except what? Somehow God made it work, right? You're at the widow of Zarephath, where there's this much oil and this much flour, there's enough for one more day. And you make the cake, and you eat the cake for that day, and you're not throwing parties, you're not hosting the neighbors, you're not selling bread on the side to make a nickel. You are surviving. And the very next day, there's this much oil and there's this much flour, and you are surviving. And that's kind of how the bank account went for 21 years. And guess what? That's been 2018, so what is that, 7 years now? Guess what? I imagine their meetings are pretty much still the same, and yet what is God doing? God is taking care of it. He's making it happen. Now, am I using this as some kind of a plug to say, hey, doesn't matter what your budget looks like? No. we always did our best to be very responsible with our budget. You just wouldn't think, that it would, well, work, but it did. And the only explanation you can get is God. So obviously, Memucan here is not taking into account that God is going to work at all. He paints the absolute worst case scenario, that not only is Vashti disobeying the king, but pretty soon other wives are going to see it and they're going to disobey their husbands, and pretty soon dogs and cats will be getting along with each other, and chaos will ensue, and our whole civilization is going to go up in flames. Yes, Miss Debbie.
Well, reading this first, I thought, well, that's not right. That's not fair. But all of the Old Testament is about God's people rebelling against God.
Yes, ma'am.
So, what do you do with that? If you're a parent, you squash it.
Yep.
If you're a husband and it's totally unreasonable, you work it out. I think rebellion needs to be dealt with. I don't think they were wrong. I think they were forward-thinking and making plans.
So, again, anytime you study the Old Testament, you always want to say, you look for the typology, where is Jesus in all of this, all right? And so now, as Debbie points out, if the scriptures describe the church as the bride of Christ, you do indeed have a history of this rebellion, if you will, of the church, of us, continuing to disobey God and to go against his wishes. And you're right, but there are, I should say, in dealing with rebellion,
God doesn't take it lightly, so maybe we're not going to pay attention.
He does not, but God also, when you look at instances of rebellion, let's look at the plague of venomous snakes, right? God's people, they grumble, they rebel, and there's this plague of venomous snakes. But what happened? Did it kill everyone? And the answer is no, it wound up being targeted. Wasn't there another place where God opened up the ground and swallowed up a whole bunch of the son rebellion?
Dathan and his brother and one of the Levite tribe leaders.
Right.
Korah.
Yep. Korah.
And he swallowed up
Yeah.
the entire family,
Yeah.
the servants, the households of those three people.
Right.
And then he destroyed the other, 250, whatever it was, that were trying to assume the role of high priesthood that belongs to everybody rather than...
Right. So God does deal with rebellion, but rarely, I shouldn't say never, but rarely, is it like widespread. But of course, you had you had the rebellion of going into the promised land, and the 12 spies, and 10 of them come back and say, hey, we can't do it, and they convince the people, and they get hard-hearted, and so then God makes them then wander, all of them. So in that case, the rebellion did have universal consequences. Sometimes, most times it did not. God would deal with the rebellious. So I still, as we read a little bit farther here, as Memucan is painting the worst possible thing, the worst possible outcome. Verse 19, if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Xerxes, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. So again, now Memucan says, replace Queen Vashti. And this, I don't know if we make this overly complicated. It kind of does sound like maybe Memucan is hoping that someone more advantageous to Memucan will become queen. If he had some plans to consolidate a little bit more his own area of control, I don't. That could be. That could be. So maybe he just saw an opportunity to, enhance his own status, get a favor from the new queen, whatever it might be. It could have been. I have to confess, I don't know how much authority the Persian queen had. Don't know. Ted.
People to say, give him carte blanche. They will take this story and say, see, it's in the Bible that the king should submit him for any request at all. The request in the first place is irrelevant. So somewhere along the line, when we look at historical events, we don't want to read every word as law truth.
Right. We want to make sure we let Scripture interpret Scripture. And when you look at the relationship between husbands and wives, if you have folks that just want to pull this out and let it stand on its own without considering everything that goes into that relationship that Scripture has to say, I agree, there is a danger.
There's no place strictly men.
Yeah.
Way overreact.
Right.
And individuals who may or may not have been.
Right. And the neat thing is throughout this whole book, you're going to see how God can take even our mistakes and overreactions and
This is kind of background. How did a Jewish Esther
yeah.
get to be the Vancouver of the Arabic?
Right. And the neat thing, I just said, I don't know historically how much authority the queen had, but again, authority and influence are very different things, because you're going to see Esther exert a fair amount of influence over Xerxes, even if her actual authority may have been less than that.
Archaeology findings and all that never correct. We don't have anything that's actually secular archaeology findings. There's nothing directly related to it. Maybe because the names of the same person are in there.
Right.
And number two, given that this wrapping around the Greek invasion,
Yeah, and to be honest, archaeology, my counsel is always just to give it a little time. It was very common a few decades ago to point out, especially in Daniel, that that archaeologically speaking, there was no evidence of a king Belshazzar. The person to succeed Nebuchadnezzar was somebody different, until they uncovered a fact that the successor to Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he made Belteshazzar his co-regent, and so you finally had archaeological confirmation. Nabonidus or something like that, yeah.
he was several down the track.
Yep. The rulers kept getting assassinated after